Well, welcome to our broadcast today. I'm just going to introduce myself and then let the other two co-hosts introduce themselves, and one of them will share with us what we're going to talk about today, and then we'll get right into it. I'm Brother James Michael Crusoe. I'm the minister of the Arlington Road Church of Christ in Hopewell, Virginia, and I'm looking forward to this broadcast.
In line. I'm Edward L. Keaton. I am the Minister Emeritus to the Church of Christ, Boulder Crest Church of Christ, Atlanta, Georgia, and a very concerned citizen as to what's going on around us. And we're looking to get into some of that very shortly.
I'm Sister Quintess Hathaway, and I'm a member at the Church of Christ at Jackson Street. And I'm on with my fellow co-hosts today as we prepare to talk about Juneteenth Freedom Day celebration.
Well, welcome, Ed, and welcome, Dr. Hathaway. I trust and pray everything's going well in Atlanta and in Nashville. My southern brother, my southern sister, y'all doing all right?
Oh, yeah. All
right.
Yeah.
Doing awesome, Brother.
Good to see your faces, yeah.
Well, good. I don't know if you can notice, but if you look above your head, it's right above Dr. Hathaway. We got a little poster of this broadcast. So, this StreamYard venue allows us some creativity, and I like playing around with it and everything. Mm-hmm. But I really like, I just like looking at myself. That's what it's all about. So I'll probably get some criticism about that. But what are we going to talk about today? Dr. Hathaway mentioned it, but let's somebody kind of give us an overview before we get into it, and then we've got a clip that we want to show, and that might be the springboard for the discussion today. But give us an idea of what we're going to talk about and why it's important to you to talk about this particular subject. Ladies first.
Thank you, Doc. Well, as we know, the story of American history has many peaks and valleys. And throughout that story of diversity and lack of equality and inclusion and all the measures that come with it, no matter what, the story of African Americans in this nation has always been one of glory. And as Americans, we ought to celebrate liberation in all of its facets and capacities, but that has not been the case for us in this nation. We came here under the bondage, under the peculiar institution of slavery. Then on this day, on June 19th, 1865, there was general order that came down from the federal government that said those in Galveston, Texas would allow to be freed on the behalf of the Union Army. We're going to dig down into this thing as deeply as possible. We're going to look at it from a historical perspective. We're going to, of course, because we are on the line with two wonderful ministers, we're going to discuss this from a spiritual perspective as well, and really have the serious, intentional conversation of what Juneteenth really looks like and the meaning behind this great and wonderful day.
Sounds good, Dr. Hathaway. Appreciate that. Dr. Keaton, why does this interest you, and what are you looking to get out of this discussion on today?
That's a good question, and as to what we get out of it. But I think it's important that we recognize there is a common thread that runs from Juneteenth up through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, the peonage system, and seemingly there's always something that tends to hinder our upward mobility and the development of our economic system as a people, development of our minds educationally. There's always something. And I think that Juneteenth is simply a reflection of many of the backroom nefarious acts that have occurred over the years, in that those in the Galveston, Texas area had no idea that the Emancipation Proclamation had already taken place, had been given in 1863, but they got it 2.5 years late. And so that's a problem. And as we look back through the years, we can see that there have been many acts that are similar to that. And I want us to look at that so we can determine where do we go from here and how do we avoid this kind of stuff moving forward.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I'm just going to be a student sitting at you all's feet on today, taking notes and everything. But it interests me because it's history that's left out, and it makes you wonder how much history has been left out. We went to school, we heard about the Civil War, we heard about slavery. We went to school, we heard about so-called Columbus discovered America and all of that. That's history that was given to us. But there's a lot of history that has been left out. And I think that should be discussed. And that's what tweaked my interest, and especially since we're taping now and June 19th is coming right up, I thought it would be good. Let's play this recording that Dr. Hathaway found on YouTube, and then after we play this, let's just respond to it. It's just a brief segment that was on some years ago. Here we go. See if I can get it going.
Newest federal holiday. June 19th marks the date in 1865 when the last enslaved people in America found out that they were free. CBS News special correspondent James Brown spoke with renowned Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. about the history and the significance of Juneteenth.
Juneteenth was not embraced as a national Black holiday for a long, long time, but it was kept alive by Black people in Texas. And that's what's so sweet about it. Our people have been hungry for holidays, hungry for tradition, hungry for stories about Black history.
Because
without a past, you have no future. Did you like Harvard?
perhaps no one has done more to inform Americans of their past and in turn their future than Henry Louis Gates Jr. By day, he is a professor and director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard.
I'm Henry Louis Gates Jr. Welcome to Finding Your Roots.
By night, he is the host and producer of the PBS genealogy show, Finding Your Roots, as well as countless documentaries on Black history.
These are the big three in the history of freedom of our enslaved ancestors. The Emancipation Proclamation, signed on January 1st, 1863, Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, and then finally the ratification of the 13th Amendment on December 6, 1865, which is what finally and ultimately abolished the institution of slavery.
Why do you think that June 19th stuck?
One of the reasons that I think Juneteenth stuck is that we're all charmed by the poetic brilliance of the name, Juneteenth. What better name for a June 19th could there possibly be? That's great. It's fetching. You know, it's catchy.
As with all catchy names, Gates says there is also a bit of fiction around that day in 1865 when Gordon Granger issued General Order Number 3 to free the enslaved Black people of Galveston, Texas, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Well, we were raised to think that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, right? The problem is that the Emancipation Proclamation in and of itself didn't have the power to free anybody. It only applied to enslaved people in the Confederacy, and it can only be enforced if Union troops had captured territory in the South, in the Confederacy. Only about 500,000 enslaved men and women, we think, actually got their freedom from the Emancipation Proclamation. And James, there were 3.9 million enslaved African Americans. So the overwhelming majority of our ancestors were not freed by the Emancipation Proclamation.
So the significance then of General Gordon Granger going to Galveston.
We all think that the Civil War ended when Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, which was April 9th, 1865. But that's not true. There were several different Confederate armies. So Texas finally surrenders to the Union on June 2nd. Gordon Granger comes, and on June 19th in Galveston, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation, because now the Union Army is in possession of the territory. So that's the true story.
And what about the notion that enslaved Black people in Texas did not know they were free?
One of the myths about Juneteenth is that nobody in Texas had heard about it. But there are two reasons that many historians think that Black people knew about the Emancipation Proclamation too. One is because of the proverbial grapevine. So there was this miraculous way for enslaved people to communicate plantation to plantation and state to state. But the second factor is that because Texas was removed from the main action of the Civil War, many slaveholders moved to Texas for safety, and they took their enslaved people with them. Those enslaved people would have known about the Emancipation Proclamation by and large, and would have told other enslaved people. But no one could enforce it because the Union did not capture territory then. When I came here, I dedicated this tree in honor of my mother and father.
Professor Gates says the most important thing about Juneteenth is the era that came after.
The most radical thing that happened after the end of the Civil War for the rights of our enslaved ancestors were the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and the Reconstruction Acts. This was the first concentration of Black power. In the summer of 1867, 80% of all eligible Black men who were formerly enslaved in the South registered to vote. And in 1868, they actually voted. Ulysses S. Grant won the presidency. So you could reasonably say that Black men had elected a president of the United States.
Back in Galveston, Texas, the formerly enslaved began marking their freedom with the celebration 1 year later in 1866, and have been celebrating Juneteenth ever since. As far as Professor Gates is concerned, the details of Juneteenth are less important than the power of its message.
There's a kind of poetic magic in that story, a kind of comfort, a kind of retribution, a kind of belated administering of justice that appeals to all of us. Juneteenth is one of the first holidays that Black people created on their own. And of the holidays that they created in slavery times, Juneteenth is the one that survived and is now a national holiday.
Isn't it important for all Americans to understand that Juneteenth ought to be embraced by all Americans?
For a country built upon the love of freedom, any manifestation of the enjoyment of freedom should be celebrated by all our countrymen. Let's hope for that day.
In Cambridge, Massachusetts, James Brown, CBS News.
All righty. Any thoughts? I think we lost Dr. Hathaway to our recording, but Brother Ed, you're still on.
Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts when you look at that?
Again, he stated some facts very succinctly and went to the heart of what Juneteenth was about. But the question is, again, where do we go from here? It's a celebration. And it is important, I do believe, for people generally amongst us and the country as a whole to know what brought the holiday about. And to look at the conditions that led to child slavery lasting so very long in the first place, over 240 some years. Mm-hmm. And at a glance, we can see that someone was profiting from free labor. And it does appear that there was a great imbalance that came about of the North and the South, because during this time, they were at the top of the economic scale, I guess you could say, the South was, and that they were working people generating the cotton and I guess the cane and whatever else that they could sell on the open market with free labor. And the South that we know today and that we live in, much of how they live and the quality of life was gained on the backs of Black folk. So what can be done about that? You know, we talked about reparations and all of that. I don't really have a lot of confidence in there being reparations, but of us getting reparations. But I think it is a good idea overall that some kind of way they can atone for the sins that they have committed against us. But along with that, Dr. Crusoe, it's important that we as a people understand the value of education, because it was during the time of Reconstruction from around 1865, I think, to about 1877, we were moving up educationally, we were buying property, we were being elected to public office, and so forth, until the Great Compromise by President Hayes, because there was a controversy about that election year. And around 1877, there was something developed called the Great Compromise, because at the time that we were making advances in the South, particularly where the federal troops were, there was this great compromise that the federal troops leave the South. And when the federal troops left the South during Reconstruction, at the zenith of our progress, in walked the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow, because we had no protection. There was no buffer against white tyranny, because the federal troops left the South. Again, in walked Jim Crow, the black codes, and all of these things that kept us locked down for many years beyond Reconstruction, all the way to the 50s, when the civil rights movement began again in earnest, and particularly Brown versus Board of Education, when desegregation came into being. And even then, there was still Jim Crow, because when the order came down that the South needed to desegregate schools, the Supreme Court said also, you do it, but with all deliberate speed, which means drag your feet and do it carefully and strategically. So much of what we see today, Dr. Crusoe, in the great disparity in wealth and education, in the medical field, and us getting the medical help we need, is because of us having been held back so long, voiceless people, until people like King and Thurgood Marshall and others who rallied to our support, and even John Brown, the abolitionist. But there has always been something in this country, in a concerted effort, nefariously, to hold us back. But what would have happened, Doctor, if America could have seen us as first-class citizens rather than second-class citizens, with all of our ingenuity, all of our intelligence? What could we have been as a country if they didn't try to hold us back with concerted efforts? So there's a lot back there.
Yeah, appreciate that. And you brought us up to date on some things as well. You know, when I was watching the clip, a couple of things, or a number of things, just triggered in my mind. For some reason, I just don't think of Texas as a southern state, but I guess it is considered a southern state.
Mm-hmm.
But did you notice how when the Emancipation Proclamation first came, I think 1863, that some of the Southerners moved to Texas? You know, they moved to Texas with their slaves.
With their slaves.
You know, they got to have the slaves. You know, they didn't go by them. They didn't leave the slaves in freedom, but they went to Texas, and I guess they're trying to get as far as from the north as they can. You got any thoughts about that? To me, that's evil.
Well, it's beyond evil, and it also shows, Doctor, they were set on holding on to free labor.
Yeah.
But some within those ranks will look at us, we're lazy and shiftless. But who's lazy when you have to go across the Atlantic Ocean and bring people back by guns at gunpoint to work for free? And
Yeah.
you call us lazy? And so something is very wrong with that. And even today, the vestiges of that are still with us. And there is a reason why there is such a gap in income in Black households and Caucasian households, because what they built, they have benefited from generational wealth for centuries.
Yeah.
They're blessed by that. When they set us free in 1863 and now 65, we had nothing. We had no rights. We had no education. We had no money for sure, but we did have some skills to the degree that we maybe acquired during slavery because we had to. But when they gave us our freedom, we had nothing to work with. And so the result, Doctor, we had to go back to the plantation and do sharecropping. And some of the large insurance companies and the wealth we see across America was built on the backs of slaves who worked for free. And again, the lifestyle, I'm not in awe of some of what my white brethren have. I'm not in awe about it because I know how they achieved it.
Yeah.
It was not so much on their intelligence, but the very ruthlessness and the inhumanity, the evil that you would work a person to that extent. This is deeper than Juneteenth. And that you would work a person from early in the morning before the sun comes up until the sun goes down for nothing, barefooted most of the time, sleeping on dirt floors, castigated and emasculated by them, supposedly. Where in that is honor? Where is the manhood in that? Where is the sense of humanity in something like that? Because I'm going to tell you, I couldn't do another human being like that. There's so much more to it. And I suppose Juneteenth is just, it really ignites a greater conversation that I think we need to have. And it's not us that need to make these changes. I'm saying that America as a whole, they need to atone for what they have done. Either they will atone in front of us and to us and for us, or certainly they're going to have to pay for what they did to us, in that I don't see any sense of humanity in it at all. Looking at
yeah, there is no humanity. I think we can agree to that. They were just whites were just thinking about economics. They didn't even see blacks as human.
That's right.
We're just cattle or horses, that you use to plow the field and all of that. Before, I'm hoping Dr. Hathaway will come back on. She has some computer issues.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to get back to Juneteenth just a little bit.
Okay.
There's a book by Elliott Smith and Cicely Lewis. I think Lewis is the executive editor, but they wrote a book, Left Out of History, The Real History of Juneteenth. And they collaborate what we just looked at in the clip. But did you notice how they celebrated Juneteenth initially and how it's celebrated now? Initially, they were celebrated by dressing up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when June 19th came, they would dress up. Sometimes there's discussion about how do you dress when you come to church? Do you dress up or do you dress down? But when they talked about celebrating Juneteenth in those days, they dressed up and they really had a party. And also the Black church at that time played a part in Juneteenth. Let me read just a little bit from Lewis's book. It said Black churches played a big role in the development of Juneteenth. These churches formed after slavery ended to offer the newly freed a place to worship. Many early celebrations were held inside Black churches. Soon, many churches bought land for celebrating the end of slavery. The churches quickly became a community hub. People learned about current events and politics at church. Decades later, Black churches pushed for expanded Juneteenth celebration throughout the country. I read that for a number of reasons. But what can the Black church do, Brother Keaton, to help awareness of Juneteenth, or not just Juneteenth, but some of the things that you mentioned that we find ourselves, our ancestors faced with, and what we're faced with now? Should the Black church be a voice? And what kind of voice? Are we powerless? You know, or do we just get in the pulpit and we're impotent? You know, what can we? You know,
you're setting me up for something here. I got to get ready.
Well, I mean, I'm just, you know, let's just talk like we just talk. I mean, you know, you know, I mean, do we just talk about Christ and Him crucified? You know, or do we talk about economic development? Do we? Can the church get involved in financial freedom? Because we can't look for a handout, because we're not going to get a handout. We can't look for the white man or those that have economic power to give us a handout. And let me say it like that. So how do we educate ourselves, and how does the Black church fit into that, if it fits at all?
Doctor, I tell you what, that a series of those questions, and I think from your standpoint and mine, they were rhetorical because you already know the answer. And I do believe that the Bible says that to the Christian in particular, in one of Peter's letters, I think 2 Peter chapter 1, is that God has given us all things that pertain to life and godliness. And I think that passage can be used here. I think everything we need, Dr. Crusoe, is already in the Bible. I think it is the lack of application, and sometimes the onus falls on the preachers who don't tend to preach to empower people beyond the day of worship setting. But I do believe that everything we need is in that book. It's our answer. But as far as I'm concerned, it's the way that the scriptures are applied. We can, on purpose, empower people to be better money managers. We can empower people to become better educated. We can empower people about the importance of having good, strong families, the importance of marriage before intimacy. The Bible has all of that in it. And we do know that there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it's the way of death. But I appreciate the question, and the question really has a great importance, great value that we speak to it. And I'll say this. Now, there was an interview, and all of this is tied into what you just asked me.
Yeah.
A young man by the name of a congressman out of Florida by the name of Byron Donalds was interviewed by Joy Reid, and I believe he was interviewed by Abby Phillip on CNN. And he was in a conversation someplace in Maryland, and the subject of his conversation had to do with during the times of Jim Crow. These are his words. He referenced Jim Crow 3 times in that short span. And he repeatedly talked about how during the Jim Crow era, you had more men in the households. You had a higher percentage of people getting married and remaining with that woman and the family together, that family nucleus there together. And he mentioned how that by that these developments of us remaining tight as a family, that would help protect your family, of the man rather, could protect the family by being in the presence of his children, his wife, etc. And then she went back and quoted this to him, and this is something that happened during Jim Crow in 1943. It raises my ire. It's disappointing. It is morbid. It's ugly. And that is 1943. Young man by the name of Willie James Howard, 15 years old, was lynched. And because he had written a letter of sorts, he had a crush on a little white girl, and he wrote her a letter to that extent. But it was just his 15-year-old innocence. The white girl's father found the letter. Then they followed up by finding the young man who wrote the letter, and his daddy took them to a bridge on the Swanee River, tied his hands behind his back, and told him that you can either be shot in the head or you can jump in the river and drown with your hands tied behind your back. And his father was forced to witness this. And he jumped in the river and drowned while his father looked on in horror. Now, what am I getting at? That was Jim Crow. That was the era of Jim Crow. And this is what Byron Donalds referenced, how that we were better off in that being in the house with our loved ones, that we could protect our families, but no such thing, because we had no help at that time. And the result is that boy died because he wrote a letter to a white girl. So this is Jim Crow. Dr. Crusoe, there are hundreds and hundreds of stories like that are untold. And we have to dig this stuff up so we can better understand.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah, yes, we got it back on. Okay.
So that we can better understand what we're dealing with. And I'm going to tell you something. Even accounts like that, I don't have any animosity toward Caucasians. What we're saying is this is what happened, and we ought to talk about it and not brush it under the rug. Let's talk about it. And no one has atoned for these things these things have happened to us over centuries.
Well, I think that's
lynchings. I'll close on this.
That's going to be a podcast.
Lynchings didn't start until after Reconstruction.
Yeah. I think that's going to be a future podcast discussion. Now that we've got Dr. Hathaway back, I want to get back to Juneteenth before our time runs out. Let me ask both of you this question, and I'll respond as well.
Can you all hear me?
We got you. Yeah, you on, sis. Yeah. Here's the question: Why do you think it was important for Texas to make Juneteenth a state holiday? Now, it's a federal holiday now, but Texas was the first state to make it a state holiday. So that's my first question. Then I want to talk a little bit about the person who initiated the bill in Texas. We can't forget him. His name was Al Edwards. But let me ask this. Why do you think it was important for Texas to make Juneteenth a state holiday?
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Hathaway. Yeah. Can you hear us? She probably can't hear us.
Yeah. Dr. Hathaway, can you hear us? I don't think she can, Doctor.
All right. Well, go ahead, Dr. Keaton. Go ahead and respond to that.
Well, I'll say this. I think that, frankly, it happened to them, and the word coming to them maybe 2.5 years later, and certainly there was cause for celebration, but this is a peculiarity that happened to them, and so rightly so they would celebrate it and continue to celebrate it, because I think the celebration also shines the light on how it happened, why it happened, and the light goes all the way back to slavery. That you know, and that's what's happening. I think that Juneteenth is important, but it's one element that is highlighted in our struggle. It's just that one thing, because
Well, we
there's a whole
lost
lot
her
of other
again.
things. Pardon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we lost Dr. Hathaway again. Yeah, I think it's important as well because, you know, Texas was perhaps the last state to find out about it.
Mhm.
And then in the clip, it was stated that they probably knew, but they just didn't honor it. You know,
That's right.
some slaves were aware of it and still didn't honor it. But it was Al Edwards, who was a member of the Texas House of Representatives, that brought the bill to Texas, and it was finally ratified January 1st, 1980,
Yes.
1980 in Texas. And then it was stated that President Biden made it a federal holiday. Now, back in the day, before I even did any reading about Juneteenth um, and serious reading, and I just heard about it, I heard people compare Juneteenth to the 4th of July, you know, and they said, you know, Juneteenth was Black folks' 4th of July, you know, our independence really took place then. But uh, we don't personally do any celebration for Juneteenth. I mean, we don't make it a day. But one of the things that I would like to do going forward to honor Juneteenth and recognize it is to promote Black businesses. You know, make it known about Black-owned businesses. You know, share. That's one of the reasons why I mentioned this book that was written, uh, and I'm assuming that it was written. Yeah, Cheryl Lewis, Cicely Lewis, is African American or Black. You know, let's promote Black businesses. Here's Dr. Hathaway. We can hear you, so if you can hear us, just say hi. Raise your. All right, good. Hey,
Well, welcome back, Doctor.
but listen, Dr.
I
Hathaway,
was the one that had the technology issues, right?
yeah, well, you back up. Politically, what does Juneteenth, how does Juneteenth affect anyone? Are there any political influences for Juneteenth?
Well, we know that was it 2 years ago, the President Joe Biden, our 46th president of the United States, decided to pass the legislation, sign off on the legislation for Juneteenth to become a federal holiday. It is not the only holiday that African Americans have celebrated, even under the institution of slavery, but it is the one that stuck. Even in our video that we showed earlier, we talked about that. Dr. Henry Louis Gates discussed that very openly and has been researched thoroughly. Um, you know, as a politician, we want to sign on and attach our names, our causes to things that are for the upliftment of all people. So Juneteenth Freedom Day celebration falls in that exact same line. From what I've been seeing, there are a number of events that will be happening across the country relating to Freedom Day. Even just a personal note, last year I spoke at the MLK commission down in Hot Springs, Arkansas. One of the local preachers down there, denominationalism, invited me to come down there and speak, and I spoke to a body of approximately maybe 50 or 60 people at that time. I have other colleagues in the field that will also be participating in various activities relating to the holiday overall.
All right, sounds good. I got some did you know aspects of Juneteenth. Did you know that food and drinks at Juneteenth celebrations often have a unique color, from red sodas to red velvet cake? That's one of the reasons why I got on a red shirt, you know, today. You know, when I read this, I said, let me put on my red shirt. So it says from red sodas to red velvet cakes, the color is a major component of the celebration. And the reason for that is some say red symbolizes the blood of enslaved lives lost. Others say red comes from the African people stolen and forced into slavery. The color was seen as a sign of strength by their ancestors in Africa. While the exact origins of the traditions are unclear, the color red remains present in many Juneteenth celebrations. I did not know that. You know, that's a did you know kind of thing. Did you know that Juneteenth?
Add to that, Doc.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, the Pan-Africanist flag, or the flag of Black liberation, that was created by Mr. Marcus Garvey, also includes the color red for those exact same reasons, as well as the green represents the land in which we were stolen from, and black represents those of Black or African ancestry. So let me just stick that plug in there as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why that flag is red, green, and black.
Red, green, black. Okay. Earlier, I think before you came on, I was mentioning to Brother Keaton how in the early years of Juneteenth, the ex-slaves or the free people now, they would dress up. I mean, they wore their Sunday best to celebrate Juneteenth. There's a picture in this book that shows the women with their long dresses, their bonnets on. The brothers got their derbies and cane. I mean, man, I wish I could put it up here so you could see. I mean, they really went all out in celebration. But of course, Juneteenth was not without controversy. You know, in the Jim Crow South, many white people fought to end those celebrations. What's behind that? You know, you took our freedom, you forced us into labor, then we get free, and you don't want us to celebrate. What's behind that? I don't get that. Come on.
Well, I'll say this. In 1972, May 27, 1972, I was among about 30,000 Black folk that was involved in the first African Liberation Day march in Washington, D.C. And I'm not even sure they're doing that now. This was in 1972, and 30,000 of us drove and bussed up there. And I guess, Dr. Crusoe, there's a long history of walls put up before us and celebrations. You know, we celebrate King Holiday. That's the biggest thing on the books now. But I think that it was only natural that they celebrated Juneteenth as best they could.
Mm-hmm.
But in the whole scheme of things, what does it really mean? Because Juneteenth was spurred by something else, and I think it's the something else that we need to get to the bottom of, the why. And we are searching ourselves constantly as to why these things are developing. At a certain point, you might just have to say, well, that's just how it is. But I want to salute Dr. Hathaway, because Dr. Hathaway is on the front lines, in the ditch with the political element of this whole thing, in that all we have in this country is the rule of law and men and women of good conscience. And now they're bending the rule of law. I'll say this. Okay, what we have now is someone running for office with 34 felonies. And of course, if you are a felon in America, you cannot vote. And there are other things that you cannot do. But now we have someone that is convicted, 34 felonies. They are trying to put in the White House, and 5 or 6 other cases waiting to be tried. That alone speaks volumes about how some people think. And it tells me that that's the way it is. This is our fight. We were born into this, and we just have to do the best we can. So I salute Dr. Hathaway for working in that sector, because it's about law. And so we have to keep reminding them that we need to have everyone obey the law, and no one is above the law. The law is all we have. We have God, but I think that we need to do as much as we can to make sure information goes out. This is informational. and so that people will understand and recognize the struggle is still alive today.
Struggle still alive. Dr. Hathaway, give us, as we close out, give us some closing remarks, and then we'll close out this session.
There are some very critical things that sit before us, you all. There are 3 cases and 3 stakeholder groups that I've been working with for several months now, one coming upon a little over a year, that deal with racial gerrymandering and our attack on voting rights. One of which, and Brother Chris, I'm going to let you, and Brother Keaton, I'm going to let you all in now. One case that I've been on, and I was an amici on the case, it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and the decision came down just this week that said the court stated that it needed to be sent back down to the lower court. The case is called Simpson et al. V. Thurston. In the state of Arkansas, there has never been an African American to win a statewide race, even during Reconstruction. There has never been an African American to win a congressional seat, even during Reconstruction, the post-Confederacy. So we're going to see exactly what the decision will look like as it has come back down through the appellate process from the United States Supreme Court. There's also another case out there with the Christian Ministerial Alliance that says that case is pending because the federal government, well, the federal courts are saying that that case can't even be heard right now. It's under stay or on hold because in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals that they will not be able to try their case under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Also, there's another case that comes out of Georgia where you are situated, Brother Keaton, that says it's a federal case that is rising through the court system that says they don't even want us to file any cases under the Voting Rights Act, period. When I say this is the alarm of our generation, they are upset that we even have one state where Democrats hold in the Senate. That state has been flipped blue by a number of groups that are working in the area. They don't even want us to have one. I have also been informed that if a Democrat simply runs in this overall election come 2024, there are 35 seats that are up for grabs. And if we can at least get a half to a quarter of those seats, the tide can turn and Democrats can win back the House of Representatives. I say these things because what has to happen, we as people have to have confidence in the vote. The South is our kingdom if we are willing to go out in mass numbers. And this is a conversation I have among my colleagues and friends and other people that I come in contact with. We as African Americans have to believe that we can turn the tide on this nation and have real sustainable acquisition, maintenance, and sustainable power. And it starts with the vote.
Well, thank you, and we're out of time, and we're going to have to come back and revisit what you just mentioned, and we do want to encourage the voting. And earlier it was said in the clip about when we finally got the right to vote, and the struggle it took for us to get the right to vote. So we talked about Juneteenth. And we want people to be aware of Juneteenth, what it is. I want to salute Al Edwards, who was a member of the Texas House of Representatives, for getting this bill passed. He made the effort to get the bill passed. I want to read an excerpt from the book, A Real History of Juneteenth, and then we'll call it a day or a night. And it says, as the United States struggled with social justice issues in 2020, more non-Black people realized how important Juneteenth was in the Black community. Some companies began giving employees the day off, and the momentum for Lee's dream continued to grow. So in June 2021, President Joe Biden signed a law making Juneteenth a national holiday. So let's take it further. Let's educate. Let's make people aware of Juneteenth. Let's vote. Let's not be silent. From the pulpit to the pew. Let's not just think that the preacher can get things done on Sunday morning, but those who sit in the pew have to be activists themselves. So I appreciate you all taking the time on today. And Juneteenth, the conversation was a little challenging to us, but I think we pulled it off, and I appreciate the talk, and there'll be more coming from us. So have a good evening, good afternoon, and may God bless all of you.
Take care.